All right, then. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the College of Liberal Arts Fireside Chat, featuring our Dean, Dr. Deborah Thien. I am Dan O'Connor. I'm Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts, and I will serve as your host and moderator this afternoon. After a brief introduction, we'll hear from Dean Thien and then allow some time for questions. I'm going to ask her some questions and we'll go back and forth. I'll field the questions from you in the audience. You can't speak through your through the Zoom meeting, so what you can do is write your questions in the chat, and then I will read the questions to the Dean and we'll engage in a conversation in that manner. And I also have some questions of my own that I'll ask as we go. By means of introduction, Dr. Deborah Thien, who goes by Deb, arrived at CSULB in 2006 as an assistant professor in the Department of Geography, having earned her PhD from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. In her scholarly work, Dean Thien explored the intersections of cultural geography, feminism, and cultural theory more broadly, while focusing on the geographies of emotion, of health, and of well-being, which to me sound like excellent preparation for a leader in higher education. Dean Thien has served in a variety of leadership roles, including serving as the interim director of the University Honors Program, as the chair of the Department of Human Development, and previously as the Associate Dean for Enrollment Management and Student Success here in the College of Liberal Arts. Dean Thien has been a champion of several innovative enterprises here in the college and equity areas, including expanding the diverse leadership development among our faculty and staff, graduate studies initiatives, and internships. And so welcome, Dean Thien, and I'll invite you to say a few words of welcome. All right, Deb, you're on. Why is Deb? Hold on, we're getting to you. There you go.
I have my voice.
Yes.
Thank you so much to my colleague, Dan O'Connor. It's always a pleasure. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in this fireside chat, my inaugural fireside chat. It's a pleasure. As Associate Dean O'Connor indicated, I have been around for a while. You can hear in all the different jobs I've had on this campus. I've been at CSULB since 2006. So it's a real honor for me, and of course a privilege, to serve now as the Dean of this college that I've called my professional home for 16 years. So I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit more about myself and about my vision of the college over the next hour or so.
Wonderful. Dean Thien, I'm going to start with a little bit about your personal background, and so people can get to know you as a person and your interests in both your personal and scholarly pursuits. And so let me begin by asking you, what was it that led you to pursue the liberal arts, both as a major in college and as a profession?
This is a great question, and of course, a lot of our students face this question when they come to us. I think as long as I can remember, I've had an excitement for understanding something new, for being exposed to different ways of looking at the world. And I think this is in part because I grew up in a small town on an island in Western Canada, a first generation to college student. But my parents were readers. My father completed his high school education later in life, and he had this great bookshelf that I explored. My mother worked in the elementary school library, so again, it gave me a lot of exposure to books. And while I was in a small town on an island, books took me everywhere. So I think that was the beginning. When I got to college, I was exposed to such a wealth of opportunity to read in a deep way. So some of my favorite classes, when I think back, were the Bible as literature, which was fascinating. I did a German literature and translation course, and that introduced me to the idea of translation itself as an art form, and the idea that taking ideas from one cultural context to another from one language to another is this kind of incredible act in and of itself. I have a very vivid memory of sitting in the library at my first college and reading this text and understanding in a true way what it meant to read a text, to really read and deeply understand something from a text. I've also loved to write my whole life. I kept journals my whole childhood. When I became a professor, my mother said to me, she always knew I would do something like that. And that was a surprise to me. I didn't always know I would do something like that, but I always did love to learn. I've always loved to read. I've always loved to write. When you look at my educational history, it looks very diverse on the surface. I started with a degree in English literature. Then I moved to a master's in gender studies. And then I did my doctoral work in geography. And, people wonder what could possibly connect all these seemingly very diverse disciplines. And for me, there's a thread all the way through of understanding how we make sense of ourselves in the context of other people, in the context of places and communities. And that's just something that has permeated through all of those. That's the thread for me that has linked all those seemingly diverse disciplines. And I think that's very much the richness of the liberal arts, the interdisciplinarity that a liberal arts path brings.
Mhm. It's awesome. And, later on, I want to pursue this a little bit further. You and we often share our love of books and what we're reading. And so I want to save some of that. I'm going to give some time for other people to ask questions, but later in our conversation, I want to get back to your love of reading and how important that's been in your life. You mentioned your transition from going from interest in your undergraduate work in literature and English literature to moving into feminisms and geography. So tell us a little bit about that transition to those disciplines. Were there specific problems that you wanted to think about in your graduate work and in your subsequent scholarship? Are there particular social issues or problems that might have impacted you personally, or that you thought as social goals to think deeply about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think where my undergraduate honors dissertation started, it was a comparison of two novels. The Nobel Prize winning novelist, although she wasn't at the time that I was reading this, but Doris Lessing and her novel called The Golden Notebook.
Right.
I did a comparative study of that with an East German author, Christa Wolf, and her novel called, in English, The Quest for Christa T. And what I was interested in understanding when I did that comparative study was how the characters in each of these books wrote themselves into understanding their places in the world, how they used, in each case, journaling as a mechanism to understand themselves. For me, that was very much about gender and women's place or lack thereof in different contexts. When I subsequently, after finishing my undergraduate degree, ended up in New Zealand, and that's a whole other conversation, but I ended up in New Zealand, and I ended up working for a women's alcohol and drug recovery center. So I served as a support worker, and it was very meaningful work. And I became fascinated by how and why it was that the women using this service, why they picked this particular service. Out of all the services they could have chosen to seek help from, they were picking this particular space, a women-only space. So I wanted to understand that. So I interviewed the women that attended the space. I interviewed the professionals that worked there. And of course, some of the reasons why they chose such a space were for the sense of safety, being in a women-only environment, the sense of community, the sense of shared understandings. That's not to say, of course, that women across all the variety of possible femininity that's out there understand each other in some kind of intrinsic way, but there were some shared experiences, and that shared sense of experience was really important to why the women used that particular house. That led me into thinking about space more explicitly, hence geography, and ultimately this concept of feminist geography. How do gender and space intersect? What can we learn from that? What does that tell us about how we live our lives? So when I went from New Zealand to Scotland, I worked with a feminist geographer at the University of Edinburgh, and she had a connection to a counseling service in the Shetland Isles in Lerwick, which is the largest city of the largest island of Shetland. And just to give you a sense of how Shetlandic people think about their place in the world, the largest island of Shetland is simply called mainland. So, they have a very distinct sense of their geography. And what I was researching when I was there was women's women who reside in Shetland, their sense of their health and well-being in the context of a very remote location. And just to give you an idea of the remoteness, you can fly to Shetland in a couple hours from, for example, Edinburgh. But if and only if the weather is clear, and that is not a guarantee that the weather is clear. If it's not clear, then you're looking at a 12-hour ferry ride from Aberdeen to Lerwick. So it's quite far from the world around it. It has a sense of itself of being only part of the British Isles since the 1800s. So people will say, well, we've only been part of the British Isles since the 1800s. So there's a sense of difference, distance, and I wanted to understand, what does women's health and well-being look like in that context? And just a very brief anecdote, on one of my trips to Shetland, I chatted with a man who told me that, well, there was no difference to the experience of health and well-being in the Shetlands for women. And then he promptly told me about how his wife had had their first child in a hospital in Aberdeen. This is the 12-hour ferry ride away from family and friends, because there wasn't the necessary personnel at the hospital in Lerwick. So from his perspective, it was all the same. From her perspective, I think it was quite distinct, her experience. So
that's awesome.
so
That's
a little bit about all the different experiences.
No, I like that. And I want to actually push into that a little bit further, because so when I think in common parlance, when we think about space, we think about physical space, right? We think about a classroom, we think about an office space, we think about the home as a space. But you also did quite a bit work on emotions and geographies of emotion. Can you talk about how the concept of emotional space emerges, and what does that entail, and what about your thinking makes some of that a unique experience from a gendered perspective?
Sure. So, for example, take the idea of what constitutes a safe space. For many people, the concept of what is a safe space depends very much on the person that we're speaking about and their different senses of identity, whether that's gender or anything else. But one's experience of, for example, a wide open natural space may be shaped by your experiences, whether that's a gendered experience or not, of your relative safety in such an environment. Right. So if you feel vulnerable in a space, you're going to have a sense perhaps of fear in a space that somebody else will not. So you take a space and you understand it, as you said, a room or a setting, and it might seem neutral, but once you engage with that space, coming from whatever position you come from, whatever identity you bring to it, that changes the character of the space for you. And quite often we understand those in emotional terms, in sort of even physiological terms, depending on how we react to a particular location.
You know, as a person who was a little boy growing up in the tropical climate with snake-filled spaces, I know about the geography of fear, the emotion of fear in certain geographical spaces. Yeah. One last thing before I move on, and I want to remind those of you listening in on this podcast, you are welcome. I'm going to get into some more academic stuff in just a minute, but I want to talk a little bit more about Deb and her background. You are welcome to ask questions in the chat or make comments in the chat, and we can comment on those. I just want to, it just so happens that this very morning driving into work today, I was listening to a podcast that had Mike Myers on the podcast. Mike Myers, formerly of Saturday Night Live and other movies and shows, and he's in a really interesting movie called Amsterdam this year. But anyway, he was saying, I want to ask you about your sense of Canada as a space that helped form your identity. And one of the things that Mike Myers said was, there is no one who is more Canadian than a Canadian living in the United States. And because your Canadianness becomes so front and center in that environment. And so can you talk a little bit about how you perceive your own Canadianness and the impact that Canada had in your own upbringing and your own thinking, and then your adaptation to the States?
So many thoughts come to mind when you ask this very good question. And I love that quote from Mike Myers. That I think that's very true. And I think not only in the US, but anytime you're a Canadian living abroad, as I have in several countries, you know, your sense of your national identity really comes to the fore when you're in contrast with your host nation, wherever that might be. But certainly the US and Canada have a special relationship. And I grew up, like most Canadians, I grew up on the southern border of Canada, which means along the American border. And along with that geographic proximity is the cultural proximity and the idea of our television shows and movies being you know, largely comprised of American content. Although Canada is very proud of its National Film Board, for example, and we have many, you'll hear Canadians list for you the many famous people,
Right.
Various cultural importance, who people will often misunderstand to be American, but are in fact Canadian.
Right.
I
Right.
think growing up in that southern border and growing up in the 70s and 80s, all the politics of trans-border issues, economic issues, cultural issues. I'll speak for myself. I grew up with somewhat of a knee-jerk reaction to all things American, and not always, you know, positively so. So coming to the US, you heard me say before, I lived in New Zealand, I lived in Scotland. These are what are known as the Commonwealth countries. I had never lived in the US before I came to Cal State Long Beach. I had never even thought about living in the US. And so when I came, I did not know if I would stay. And of course, I have never left since. So found a wonderful home here, have a child who is my American child. And I have really, that knee-jerk sort of, I would say, somewhat anti-American sentiment that I grew up with, you know, not sort of in a gentle way, in a Canadian way.
In a Canadian polite way, in a very polite way.
I think that that has been, you know, deeply tempered through 16 years of relationships and experiences in this American setting. But yes, I'm still Canadian. People still ask me about that. Occasionally I reveal it when I say something like out and about. Yeah, but it's, you know, I love living here. I love my community. And of course I love our college.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, let me get back to the college. And again, I want to invite our guests who are listening in to feel free to write any comments or questions in the chat, and I will share them with Dean Thien, and we'll have you be participants in this process. I want to talk a little bit about your leadership roles and your interest in leadership. You've now been serving for about 6 months in the role of Dean in the College of Liberal Arts, but your leadership journey began much earlier. What led you as you did the transition from assistant to associate to full professor? You know, did you always anticipate that you'd be going into leadership, or did you, how did that come about? What led you to becoming interested in taking on leadership roles?
Well, my younger sister would probably say I like to take leadership roles from a very early age.
Now, would she call it leadership roles or bossiness roles?
I might call it something other than leadership. But I think that when I look back over my career trajectory, I have taken leadership roles in many different spheres before ever taking formal leadership roles at the university. So I had leadership roles in my discipline, in my disciplinary organizations. I served as a journal editor in a couple of different academic journals. These are all leadership roles, not the formal kind necessarily in an institutional sense, but and why is that? I think it's because I like to affect change. I like to build bridges. The way that my mind works, I can see how things might fit together in a big picture and all the little details therein. And I like to make those kinds of differences. I think because I did grow up in you know, a non-academic household, in a working class household. My father worked in a pulp and paper mill. he very much inculcated in me the concept of social justice and the importance of speaking out and acting on needs for change. So I think leadership roles allow you to do that at scale, which is very attractive to me. So that led me to, as you said, various leadership roles around the university, and most recently this one, which has been an incredible journey so far.
Yeah, and each of your leadership roles have they have broadened as you've progressed through your career. And so do you have any particular lessons that you learned, like, for example, from your experience being an interim director of the university honors program and working with a very select, smallish group of students and faculty, and then moving into a department that was the human development department is an amalgam of folks from 4 different disciplines. And so you had an interesting mix of faculty, and then moving into the associate dean position. So just any kind of like little leadership lessons that you learned along the way, or things that impressed you, made an impression on you of the different levels of leadership?
I think for me, my biggest takeaway is the importance of, and in fact, the necessity of collaboration across multiple people. So for example, to take my deanship, which is my largest role to date, it works out of the amount of collaboration that it's built upon. So I'm not leading alone. I do not see myself as a single entity doing work in isolation. It's about working collectively. And whether that's a smaller operation like the honors program, or a large operation like our very large college, I think the principle is the same, that you work collectively and collaboratively in relational ways. And what I mean by that is you have to work together and connect with the people that you work with. That's part of building bridges. You can't build bridges with people if you can't connect with people. So I think that's really important at whatever scale of leadership we're talking about.
Yeah. Awesome. Lastly, as you mentioned, you have a child at home. You are thriving in your role as running the enrollment management, and you were running a leadership program for our faculty. What was the boost that said, I'm going to take the big dive and put my hat in for being the dean of the College of Liberal Arts, the largest college in the university? I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. And so tell us about, you had to take a pause. Even though there's a natural progression, there has to be a moment of pause of, am I up for this? So tell us a little bit about why the moment seemed right to you and what you think you bring to this moment.
It's a great question. And you're absolutely right. I did have to, when I knew that the job would become open, I had to stop and think, is this for me? Is this my next step? And as you say, I have other commitments. I'm a parent of a very active, almost 11-year-old. And so there's a lot going on. But ultimately, my question to myself was, why wouldn't I step into this role, given my years of experience, my knowledge of how the college works, all the relationships I've built over the 16 years I've been in the college, my will to get things done, my energy and my commitment, my deep belief in the value of what we do as a college, our role as an agent of change for our students. I believe in all of that so very deeply. And it seemed to me that while I'm sure that there are other talented people out there, I knew that I had everything that the college needed to move us forward.
Yeah, awesome. And we are getting questions in. And so I'm going to continue on this path about having you talk a little bit about the college and what you see. So as I mentioned before, CLA is the largest college on the campus of Cal State Long Beach. This is the nation, the world has been in a period of crisis for the last 2 or 3 years, and it's kind of become a cliche that crisis also creates opportunity. So you are stepping in at this moment of opportunity. So tell us a little bit about what you see. This is a twist on the question about your vision. What opportunities do you see for the College of Liberal Arts let's say over the next decade or so? What are your ideas about where are we going? What's happening in the College of Liberal Arts? And I might add, to give you a second, at a time when we see and we read almost weekly, if not more often, articles about the liberal arts under attack. I won't mention certain states in the United States that are, having issues with certain aspects of the liberal arts. So we see it, we're in the headlines, but Long Beach State seems to be on a different trajectory, and the CLA here especially. So tell us a little bit about how you read the moment and what you see as the future of CLA and some of the opportunities that lie ahead of us.
Thank you, Dan. These are such good questions. Let me just set the scene a little bit and give our listeners a sense of our scope and our scale. So we are a college that serves 10,000 students. We have, about 700 instructional faculty. We have 80 or so staff across 27 different departments and programs. We have about a dozen centers and institutes. And just to quickly give you a little sample of those, we have the Clorinda Donato Center for Global Romance Languages and Translation Studies. This is about to open its translation lab this fall, thanks to our generous friend Mario Giannini. We have the Hoth Center, which is serving all of our students to become effective public speakers, something that Americans year after year speak to as the most frightening thing that they can imagine, public speaking. So it's an incredibly important service that we provide, again, thanks to the generosity of the Hoth family. We have the Long Beach Center for Urban Politics and Policy. And the whole point of this center is to study the political and policy issues in the greater Long Beach area. So really digging into the issues directly affecting us right where we live here in Long Beach. And that's, of course, thanks to not only Matthew Mendez Garcia, who's the professor who runs the center, but also the generosity of John Molina. You may know of Molina Healthcare. He's also an alum of our campus. So we also have an internship program. We serve some 900 students every year who are going out into our different nonprofits in and around this campus, into corporate locations. We're a big operation. We have a big effect. We're a big college in a big university, in a big system of universities, the California State University system, which means we have an outsized impact on the community around us, on the state, and even beyond that. So I think in short, what I'm trying to say is we have the opportunity to make an incredible impact around us. We have the scope and the scale, but also we have the intellect, the creativity, the engagement with the community around us to really make some changes. You mentioned that we're facing some challenges. We have a responsibility to communicate the value of what we do in the face of these very persistent efforts to devalue the work that we do. So it's not even that people don't know what we do, it's that there's a framing of the liberal arts as something actually actively problematic. And we have to challenge that. So that's part of our responsibility as a college, is to communicate outwards. And we're doing that in a number of ways in CLA these days. We're communicating around us locally. We're communicating internally to our campus. We're part of national organizations that support and lobby for the liberal arts, the humanities in a broader context. And that's all necessary because of that kind of pushback that we're getting. We also have demographic challenges that are affecting us. So there were some declining birth rates that are going to mean that over the next decade or so, we're going to see less college-age students than we're used to educating.
Yeah.
For us in Long Beach, because of our being one of the largest of the CSU systems and one of the most popular, with 100,000 applications every year, we may not feel that as significantly as some of our partner institutions, but we still have to pay attention to it, and we still have to be thoughtful and intentional about how we communicate out to our prospective students. To that end, we have jumped into partnership with a group called the Institute for the Future, and this is part of our broader vision at Cal State Long Beach called Beach 2030. So the 2030, of course, referring to the year 2030, what does our campus look like in, what are we now? Not even 10 years hence anymore.
Right, 7 years from now, yeah.
All of a sudden, it's really just around the corner.
Right,
although
clock
we're
is ticking.
for a while.
Yeah,
So what kind of changes do we need to set in motion to ensure that we give the students, our students, the education that they're going to need as the world evolves in these next 7 years? How do we set up our students for success for the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4 careers that they're going to have as they live their very long lives? We know our mortality rates are increasing. So how do we prepare our students? And I think we have everything we need. We have that intellect, that creativity. We have that commitment to the social mobility of our students at Cal State Long Beach. And when we multiply that by the impact of our size and our effect on the state of California, I think we have an incredible ability to be an agent of change for the state and beyond. And we have to I think we do have to make some changes in how we communicate out about all of what we have to offer, that intellect and creativity and so on. So we can frame ourselves so students can see, yes, I need these sets of skills. I need these kinds of competencies in order to go forth and be able to pivot from one career to the next as they move through their lives. I think we have everything we need. So I think it's going to be a question of working collectively, working collaboratively to communicate our value. And we're going to have to be persistent about it. We're going to have to be clear and thoughtful and intentional about it.
that's awesome. I appreciate you talking about at a time when the liberal arts are questioned, in favor of perhaps more STEM oriented science, technology, engineering, and mathematical oriented fields. You nonetheless, you've been able to demonstrate for our liberal arts students the value that is taken away from a degree in the liberal arts. So I want to think about that in two ways and have you expand a little bit more, just your own vision. What do you think, since we've been working with the Institute for the Future and you had a workshop recently that included all of all of the chairs of the departments and some other college leaders were invited. What do you see from the student perspective, before we get into careers? What do you see life of a student on campus, on a college campus? What is the university experience? We hear a lot of people saying, oh, don't go to college. You can just become a coder and go work right now, or go work for a company right now. For a student, first of all, what is the experience of being on a campus worth? And then we'll go into what is the value added from that experience. So what do you think it's going to be like with the different modes of learning that we have and the different demands that the next student groups are going to be requiring of us?
Well, you're talking to someone who has training as a geographer and who's interested in issues of emotion and identity. So for me, the space of the campus, the literal space, the physical space that allows for people to come together and connect together, as well as in those virtual spaces that allows for people to come together and reflect and reach new understandings, that continues to be incredibly important. I spoke earlier about the importance of how we make sense of ourselves, and how making sense of ourselves is then also connected to how we engage in community and what our communities then look like and feel like. So I think that the university continues to be this dynamic space for people to work these things out, to figure out who they are, what they contribute, and how that then shapes the communities that they're part of. I don't think that there's any other space like the space of a university where you're actively encouraged all the time to be thinking, reflecting, asking questions. It's one of the reasons I love being on a university campus, because you're constantly, every person that you pass is in the midst of a conversation and asking questions and trying to understand something, trying to wrap their mind around something new or frame something in a new way. So I continue to think that's incredibly important. And those are skills of analysis, of synthesis, of query, asking questions that will serve our students as they leave the campus.
Yeah. I know that you walked around the last 2 days, and for our alumni, they will recall this has been the week of welcome on campus. In the last few days, right in the upper quad across from the offices of the College of Liberal Arts, there have literally been thousands of students on an hourly basis walking through, learning about all the opportunities, and not just in the liberal arts, but obviously including in the liberal arts. And it's what you said about there is, I know that there is a virtual world out there, but there is no comparison to being in these groups of students and going through these week of welcome walkways where there's every campus activity, every extracurricular activity, affinity group that you could ever imagine has an opportunity. And just to hear, as you said, the different languages, different conversations, different music. I mean, that's what makes this a universe, right? The university. Okay, so again, talking about some students, but before I talk about some students, I also want to add that part of the future, and I know you've been talking and thinking deeply about this, as part of the future of the student is oftentimes when we think about college student, we think about somebody 18 to 24 years old who just completed high school or community college and has transferred into the university. But you and I both know, and you've been talking lately about the large group out there that has not been addressed necessarily very well by universities. And part of the future of the student, of a university student, is for a different student. So can you talk about that and how the liberal arts is exactly the place that they want to come to for upskilling or for the reasons that they are pursuing education later in their life?
Sure. So we have a population that we call some college, no degree. And that's to the tune of about 4 million people in California. So it's an incredible number of people who are out there who have worked their way almost to a degree or partway to a degree, but have not finished it, and a whole host of reasons why: family reasons, career reasons, economic reasons. As a very, very economically friendly, budget-friendly campus, we're in an excellent position to serve those who have some college, no degree, and help them reach that goal that they have for themselves. And we're an excellent destination for them because of the diversity of coursework that we offer, because of the kinds of transferable skills that our disciplines can teach students that can be applicable to an incredible array of settings. It's one of the reasons why our internship program is so successful, because students coming from all manner of degrees within the liberal arts are able to take those same skills that I was talking about a moment ago, about analysis and synthesis, public speaking, oral, written communication, as well as oral communication, and they're able to extend those to enhance their lives beyond the university. So for people who are out there who are in workplaces and have their however many units towards a degree but are not quite completed, we give them the chance to come back and re-engage with this kind of space and the energy of this kind of space to finish those degrees, and then be able to project off of that into their next career step.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that is often the question that people hear out there, or that people hear other people saying, is, well, what do you do with a liberal arts degree? And one of the things that you've been involved with, both as a department chair in your role as associate dean and now as dean, is expanding the opportunities for internships, for linking majors and minors, for linking disciplines in the liberal arts with career opportunities. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of and the opportunities for internships and your goal for expanding those internships for liberal arts majors?
Sure. Well, thanks, Dan. These are all great questions. The internship at its most basic level is an opportunity for a student to experience a workplace with support. So support from their instructor on campus. It's support around professional development, and then with a supervisor at a site, whatever kind of workplace they're at, to again give them support and guidance in that workplace. And what the effect of all of that support and guidance offers to a student is the chance to learn and to grow, to make mistakes, to figure out how to operate and how to apply the skills that they're learning in their college classes to these workplace settings. So it's a very rich experience. And what we see is that the students are able to transition from that into paid employment much more seamlessly than if they didn't have that kind of opportunity. What's really become apparent over several years now is that what we urgently need to do is to try to get as many subsidized internships as possible, because many students who would benefit from an internship experience, they make a calculation and they say, well, I can't devote these many
Right.
hours a week to an unpaid experience.
Right.
So we've been very fortunate to have generous donors who've helped us with scholarships and subsidizing of internships, so that students are not, so that the access to these kinds of experiences is as wide as possible. And that's what I would like to see, as many of our students as possible have the opportunity to take an internship, and for the finances of it to not be a barrier to that experience.
I'm reminded by your comments of, we have an endowment that's a donor based on a donor's gift that pays interns to work in our battered women's shelter in Long Beach. That's exactly, you have sort of the vocational aspects, and a lot of our students have vocational drives, but they also have very real economic needs. And so to the extent that we can generate more gifts that allow us to pay interns to go into the nonprofit sector and into other career trajectories so they can gain that valuable work experience. Yeah, that's just so important.
Can I
Go
just
ahead.
add to that as well? Another piece of that our alums play that is so critical is that our alums themselves, yourselves, if you're on this call and you're one of those folks, you are the embodiment of a successful career trajectory, and that role modeling is incredibly important for our students. We see that time and again. So if they see your experience, they see your path, it gives them a visual, it gives them an actual representation of what it might look like to go from a BA in one of our programs into a real life work setting and have a successful, satisfying, and meaningful career moving forward. So thank you to those of you who are out there, our alums, who are modeling those successful career trajectories.
You mentioned our alums, and we have many of them on the call. I have a list of participants in front of me. I'm not going to call any of them out individually, but what they represent, as I look at them, what they represent is a variety of, some of them are student alumni, some of them are faculty, former faculty of ours, and some are just members of the community. What other kinds of ways can alumni and friends of the college get involved in the college, get involved with our students? Some ways that involve making donations, but other ways that involve participation. So can you think about some ways that our alumni and community friends can get involved in supporting the College of Liberal Arts, your mission, your vision, and our students?
Sure. Well, we've just talked about some of them, which are, for example, serving as internship sites. If you have a workplace that is a possibility for students to connect as a workplace experience, then we absolutely want to partner with you on that kind of front. If you're willing to dial in or come by our campus and attend a class, stand in front of a classroom of students and tell them your story, whether you're a former faculty member or a former student here, these are the kinds of real life experiences that can be the moment that changes a person's life choices, to tell them your story and for them to connect with and resonate with what your experiences are. So we would love you to come to campus, whether that's if you can make it in person or whether you can come virtually. So we've had, just recently we had an alum come and speak in one of our classrooms just last week, and those are incredible and invaluable experiences for our students. So internship sites, serving as a role model, connecting with our students. We have we're working on reestablishing an emeritus lecture, a faculty emeritus lecture. We welcome you to participate and be part of that community. I think being part of the Beach, being part of liberal arts is a lifelong relationship. So we want to stay connected with you. And I'm certainly eager to hear and open to hearing your thoughts about how you want to be connected to us and how we can connect with you.
Yeah. And to that end, I would also invite all of our listeners to please just use the Google machine and type in CSULB CLA, and that'll take you to our CLA website where we have a calendar of events. You are obviously welcome to pretty much every outside speaker that comes to campus. We have many different mini conferences on our that are hosted by our college. We have a program called Scholarly Intersections, which brings speakers and events to campus that are interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. We also have Instagram and all those other digital media means of tracking what's going on in the college. And so I encourage you to use whatever those modes that you prefer, your preferred mode of interaction. We are on them. One of the things that Dean Thien has done and has really stepped up in the last 6 months is our presence by issuing a weekly memo from the dean, but also we have a group that's involved with the communication strategy. Do you want to talk a little bit about the communications group and what they're doing?
Sure. Yeah, this has been really important because of our size, and not only our size on campus, but the size of our networks, and that includes all of you on the call. It can be difficult to keep up with ourselves. So one of the first things I did as dean was to appoint our chair of journalism and public relations, Dr. Jennifer Fleming, to serve as my strategic director of communications for the college. And so she's making sure, as Dean O'Connor suggested, that we have an internal communication mechanism. We have a weekly internal communication mechanism called the Monday Memo. We have a whole host of interns that work with us in the college. So we're not just, by the way, talking about internships offsite, but we actually provide a number of internships internally, and they're getting great training on these communications and other tasks and duties of a dean's office. So we have people on Instagram, on Twitter. I have a LinkedIn profile, and please join me on LinkedIn if you're not already joined in. It's a great way that I can share with you what's happening in our college. Yesterday, we were in our beautiful Earl Miller Japanese Gardens on campus, and we were marking the Lunar New Year. And we were together looking forward to the rest of the year being full of peace and prosperity, as is symbolized by the Year of the Rabbit. So there are all kinds of, there were a number of alums and emeritus faculty that were present at that event, filling our Japanese garden with our whole community. So that was wonderful to see.
Awesome. Well, my clock notes that we've reached 10 minutes to the hour, which means that that's passing time here at the university. This is when everybody has time to prepare for their next meeting. If I don't see any further comments or questions in the chat, I want to thank our guests for joining us today. I want to remind you to get involved. We're here to listen to you and be as involved as possible as in whatever means works for you. Dean Thien, thank you so much for sharing some of your personal life and background with us. You know, I've been working with you for, I don't know, 17 years, and I learned some things in this interview. So thank you so much for being here. And we want to wish you all a great rest of the day, and hope you'll join us again for our future fireside chats and other events on campus. By all means, keep in touch with our CLA website if you want to contact Becky Zeffirino Chung, or if you want to contact Howie Fitzgerald, by all means, reach out to them or reach out to the dean directly, and we are happy to respond to you and find a way to keep you involved in the College of Liberal Arts. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.